Britney Spears' journey begins far from the flashing lights of Los Angeles or New York. She was born in the small town of Kentwood, Louisiana, a place where everyone knew everyone, and dreams of superstardom seemed almost unreachable. Yet from a very young age, Britney carried with her something that couldn't be ignored, a natural gift for music and movement. She would sing in church, dance at local events, and charm family and friends with an energy that was impossible to contain. In her hometown, she was more than just another small-town girl. She was the one people whispered about, saying she was destined for something greater. Her parents quickly recognized that spark. Her mother, Lynn, in particular, made sacrifices to help her daughter chase opportunities that stretched far beyond the borders of Louisiana. This meant long drives to auditions, managing tight finances, and constantly pushing Britney to the next stage of her talent. Unlike many kids her age, Britney's childhood wasn't just about school and playtime. It was about balancing both while pursuing auditions, competitions, and the heavy weight of expectation that came with such undeniable potential. From entering talent shows and wowing judges, to auditioning for bigger opportunities, Britney learned early on that the entertainment industry demanded not only talent but also resilience. That lesson became even clearer when she secured her first real breakthrough, being cast on the Mickey Mouse Club. Suddenly, this girl from Kentwood was standing alongside kids who would go on to become global stars, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, and Ryan Gosling among them. For Britney, this wasn't just a dream come true, it was a glimpse of what her future could hold. But with this early success came an unspoken warning. She was thrust into the world of professional show business at an age where most children were still figuring out who they were. The charm and resilience she carried from her small-town roots became her shield, but it also meant she was learning to mask the pressures and expectations that were already beginning to mount. For Britney Spears, the stage was no longer just a place to perform, it was the proving ground for the life ahead of her. When Britney Spears signed with Jive Records at just 15 years old, she was stepping into a world few teenagers could even imagine. With her small-town roots behind her and her sights set on something bigger, Britney was about to become the face of a generation. In 1998, she released her debut single, Baby One More Time, and almost overnight, the song transformed her from a rising hopeful into a global phenomenon. The track's infectious melody, paired with her powerful yet youthful voice, captured the hearts of millions, but it was the music video that cemented her status as pop royalty. Dressed in a now iconic schoolgirl outfit, pleated skirt, tied-up blouse, and pigtails, Britney walked into the pop culture spotlight in a way that few before her had. It was provocative yet innocent, playful yet commanding, and it became one of the most recognizable images of the late 90s. Suddenly, Britney wasn't just another young singer trying to make it, she was the pop princess, an image carefully crafted to balance accessibility with allure. For teenagers, she was the idol they wanted to emulate. For adults, she was a curiosity that blurred the lines between child star and grown performer. Her debut album of the same name skyrocketed to the top of the charts, shattering records as it went. Britney wasn't just selling albums, she was selling a cultural moment. Music executives began drawing comparisons between her and icons like Madonna and Janet Jackson, a sign that her influence stretched far beyond bubblegum pop. She wasn't just another face in the crowd of late 90s performers, she was the new standard, redefining what a teen idol could be. But with such meteoric success came the beginning of an intensity she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The media, drawn to her combination of talent, beauty, and youth, began watching her every move. Her personal life and career became inseparable in the public eye. Every interview, every photo shoot, every step outside was scrutinized. And while Britney was just a teenager trying to navigate sudden superstardom, the world was already demanding perfection. Britney Spears' rise didn't slow after her debut, it accelerated at a pace few could ever sustain. With the release of Oops, I Did It Again in 2000, she proved she wasn't a one-hit wonder but a force cementing herself at the very top of the music industry. The album went multi-platinum almost instantly, breaking sales records and placing her in the same league as the legends she had once been compared to. Hit after hit, songs that defined a generation, poured out of her catalog, and with each release, her fame only grew more massive, more intense, and more consuming. The cost of that fame was grueling. Britney's schedule was relentless: world tours that kept her away from home for months on end, endless promotional appearances, and a constant demand to reinvent her image to keep up with the industry's insatiable appetite. Behind the dazzling lights and perfectly choreographed performances was a teenager-turned-young woman who was working harder than most adults twice her age. Yet no matter how tired she was, no matter how much she gave, there was always an expectation for more. This was also the dawn of a new media era, paparazzi culture exploding in the early 2000s. Celebrities weren't just followed, they were hunted. And no one was hunted more aggressively than Britney Spears. Every coffee run, every night out, every casual moment of her life became a potential payday for photographers. Magazine covers plastered her face across shelves weekly, painting her as the flawless pop princess the public adored, while simultaneously dissecting her body, her outfits, and every misstep she made. Her personal life wasn't hers anymore either. Her relationship with Justin Timberlake dominated headlines, feeding tabloids with stories of young love, jealousy, and eventual heartbreak. Their romance, and its very public unraveling, was treated as entertainment on a global scale. Britney wasn't just living her life, she was performing it for millions who felt entitled to every detail. The pressure was suffocating. She wasn't allowed to simply grow up in private, she had to remain youthful but mature, sexy but innocent, approachable yet untouchable. The world demanded that she be flawless, endlessly marketable, and perpetually perfect. And behind the smiles, the hit songs, and the glamour, Britney Spears was already carrying the impossible weight of an image that no one, not even her, could live up to forever. By the mid-2000s, the cracks in Britney Spears' carefully constructed image began to show, and the world watched with a cruel fascination. Her whirlwind romance and eventual marriage to backup dancer Kevin Federline became one of the most talked about stories in pop culture. For a time, it seemed like Britney had found stability and happiness in her role as a wife and soon as a mother. But instead of celebrating her, the media turned her personal life into a spectacle. Tabloids painted her as reckless, unfit, and irresponsible, with motherhood becoming another lens through which she was judged. Every moment with her children was stalked by paparazzi, who sold images of Britney carrying her sons to a hungry public eager for scandal. The marriage quickly unraveled, and when Britney divorced Federline, the backlash was swift and merciless. Custody battles over their two young children placed her under even harsher scrutiny. Her struggles were no longer private, they were broadcast in headlines, court documents, and photographs sold to the highest bidder. At her most vulnerable, Britney was forced to navigate not only heartbreak and motherhood but also the crushing weight of the world's judgment. Then came 2007, the year that would define her public breakdown. In one unforgettable moment, Britney walked into a salon, took the clippers into her own hands, and shaved her head. The images were instantly everywhere, on television, in magazines, across the internet. Soon after, she was photographed attacking a paparazzo's car with an umbrella, a moment of raw frustration that was twisted into tabloid gold. These weren't private struggles anymore, they had become entertainment, consumed gleefully by millions who couldn't look away. As her pain played out in front of the cameras, the cycle grew darker. Britney was placed under court-ordered psychiatric holds, hospitalized for her mental health struggles while the cameras never stopped flashing outside. Instead of compassion, she was met with mockery. Late-night comedians, gossip columnists, and even the general public turned her breakdown into a punchline. Her humanity was stripped away, and what remained was a spectacle, Britney Spears as the world's cautionary tale, her suffering packaged and sold like another hit single. What no one seemed to realize at the time was that this wasn't just a pop star losing control, it was a young woman being crushed under the relentless machine of fame. Her most vulnerable moments turned into a form of collective entertainment. For Britney, the breakdown wasn't just about her, it was about a world that fed on her pain and refused to let her heal. In 2008, after years of public struggles and escalating concern for her well-being, the court granted Britney Spears' father, Jamie Spears, sweeping legal control over her life. It was called a conservatorship, something typically reserved for the elderly or those unable to care for themselves. At first, it was framed as a temporary measure, a way to protect Britney while she recovered from her breakdown. But what was sold as short-term intervention quickly became a long-term prison, one that would stretch on for an astonishing 13 years. Under the conservatorship, Britney was stripped of the most basic rights that most people take for granted. Her father had control over her finances, her medical decisions, her career choices, and even her personal life. On paper, she was considered too unstable to manage her own affairs. Yet, in the same breath, she was sent back on stage, performing night after night, generating millions of dollars for the very system that claimed she was incapable of functioning. This contradiction sat at the heart of her ordeal, a woman deemed too unfit to decide what to eat for lunch, but perfectly fit to sell out arenas and fuel a multi-million-dollar empire. For the public, the narrative was carefully managed. Media outlets often framed the conservatorship as a benevolent arrangement, suggesting that her father was simply protecting her. Interviews and appearances were designed to reinforce the image of Britney as fragile, incapable, and in need of constant supervision. The darker truth, that she was being controlled and exploited, was buried beneath a polished facade that many accepted at face value. But not everyone was convinced. A growing number of fans began to suspect that something wasn't right. They noticed inconsistencies in her behavior during interviews, her cryptic demeanor on stage, and the fact that she never seemed truly free. Whispers of exploitation began to spread online, but without clear proof, they were dismissed by the mainstream as conspiracy theories. Still, the eerie contradiction lingered. How could one of the most successful entertainers in the world, a woman who had proven her ability to work tirelessly and deliver excellence, be treated as though she were a helpless child? The answer lay not in her capacity, but in the control others held over her. Britney Spears, the global superstar, was no longer the master of her own life. She was a commodity, managed, packaged, and controlled by a conservatorship that decided who she was allowed to be. As the conservatorship solidified its grip, Britney Spears was thrust back into the role that had built her fortune and fame, the performer. In 2013, she launched her Las Vegas residency, Piece of Me, a show that would go on to rake in hundreds of millions of dollars and cement her as one of the highest-grossing acts on the Strip. Night after night, Britney delivered electrifying performances, proving that her talent and star power remained unmatched. But behind the dazzling lights and booming applause was a very different reality, one of strict schedules, controlled rehearsals, and a life where her freedom barely extended beyond the stage. Everything about Britney's world was managed. Her public appearances were carefully curated to maintain the illusion that she was thriving. Smiling on red carpets, giving brief interviews, and posing for photos, she was presented as stable, happy, and okay. Yet those who looked closer noticed cracks in the facade. Her interviews often felt strained, her responses rehearsed, and her demeanor oddly distant. To fans who knew her best, something was off. Reports soon began to surface that Britney wasn't performing out of passion or choice, but out of obligation, forced into grueling work schedules despite concerns for her health. She was treated less like an artist and more like a product, pushed onto stage after stage to keep the money flowing for those who benefited from her conservatorship. The whispers grew louder. Britney Spears had become a machine for profit, a humanity secondary to the empire built on her name. Fans began to notice her unusual behavior outside of performances as well. On social media, particularly Instagram, Britney posted videos and captions that seemed strange, cryptic, or unsettling. Some clips showed her dancing in ways that felt offbeat, her smile appearing forced, her words sometimes confusing. For many, these posts weren't just odd, they were a cry for help. A community of fans started dissecting her online presence, convinced that Britney was trying to communicate something from behind the curtain of control. The image of Britney Spears as a free, thriving superstar was increasingly difficult to reconcile with the signs of distress and control that leaked through. To the world, she was still a dazzling headliner in Vegas, but to those paying attention, she was a woman trapped, her stage persona masking the reality of a life lived under lock and key. It started quietly, almost like a whisper, with the most devoted Britney Spears fans noticing things that didn't sit right. Her odd Instagram posts, her vacant expressions in interviews, and the strange contradictions between how well she was supposedly doing and the reality of her heavily controlled life. These fans began to piece together a troubling picture. that Britney wasn't living freely at all, but was being kept under the thumb of a conservatorship that benefited everyone but her. What at first seemed like an internet rumor began taking on the weight of something much bigger. By the late 2010s, the whispers had transformed into a movement. Across social media platforms, fans began using the hashtag, demanding answers and transparency about why a woman capable of performing rigorous Las Vegas shows was still deemed incapable of running her own life. They dug into court documents, analyzed her social media posts, and pushed their findings out to the wider public. What began as niche fan theory quickly gathered momentum, gaining the attention of people far outside Britney's fan base. Soon, the movement spilled out of the digital world and into the streets. Protesters gathered outside Los Angeles courthouses with bright pink posters, chanting for her freedom while her legal battles played out behind closed doors. The rallies grew larger with each passing year, proving that this wasn't just a small group of conspiracy theorists, it was a grassroots campaign that tapped into something bigger, the fight for autonomy and human rights. Celebrities began lending their voices as well. Cher, Miley Cyrus, Paris Hilton, and countless others publicly expressed support for Britney, demanding accountability and drawing even more attention to her plight. The movement had officially broken into the mainstream, forcing the media to address questions it had long ignored. Then came the documentaries. Framing Britney Spears in 2021, followed by Controlling Britney Spears, pulled back the curtain on the exploitation and abuse Britney had endured. These films laid out evidence, testimonies, and chilling details that validated what fans had been saying all along: Britney was not free, and she had been silenced for years. Suddenly, the world saw the situation not as a tabloid spectacle, but as a human rights crisis. What began as a small community of devoted fans had now become a global movement, uniting strangers under a single demand: that Britney Spears be given back her life. Was no longer just a slogan, it was a battle cry that could not be ignored. In 2021, after years of silence and speculation, Britney Spears finally found her voice in the most shocking and powerful way imaginable. During a bombshell court testimony, she laid bare the reality of her conservatorship, and it was far darker than even her most loyal fans had imagined. Speaking with a raw honesty that cut through the carefully curated image that had been presented to the world, Britney revealed she had been forced into work against her will, medicated with powerful drugs to keep her compliant, and even denied the basic right to make decisions about her own body. She disclosed that she wanted to have another child but was forbidden from removing an IUD. These were not the struggles of a fragile star being protected, as the conservatorship had long been portrayed. This was a woman imprisoned in plain sight. The public reaction was one of collective shock. Fans who had fought under the banner felt vindicated, but the details Britney herself shared were even more horrifying than anyone had fully realized. Her father, her management team, and those entrusted to protect her had instead controlled her in ways that stripped away her humanity. Suddenly, the narrative that had been brushed off as fan hysteria could no longer be dismissed. The truth was out, and Britney's own words left no room for denial. As the hearings continued, they became a spectacle in their own right. The courthouse was surrounded by throngs of fans holding up pink signs and chanting for her freedom, their voices echoing the very words Britney had long been unable to speak herself. The media, which had once mocked her breakdown and fueled the conservatorship's legitimacy, now covered every detail of the case with a seriousness that reflected the cultural reckoning it had sparked. Then, after 13 long years, the impossible happened: the conservatorship was terminated. A judge ruled that Britney Spears was finally free to make her own decisions, to live her life without the chains of legal control that had bound her for over a decade. For Britney, it was the end of a nightmare, but also the beginning of a new chapter filled with uncertainty. Her relief was palpable. She expressed gratitude to the fans whose relentless campaigning had kept her story alive when so many had tried to bury it. In many ways, it was their voices that amplified hers, forcing the world to listen. But freedom did not erase the scars. 13 years of lost autonomy, of being treated as a commodity rather than a human being, had left their mark. Still, for the first time in more than a decade, Britney Spears stood in front of the world not as a controlled pop machine, but as her own person, a survivor beginning the long process of reclaiming her life. Life after freedom was never going to be simple for Britney Spears. After more than a decade of having her choices dictated by others, she suddenly faced the overwhelming task of navigating independence on her own terms. The world that had once cheered her downfall was now watching her every move with equal intensity, but this time through the lens of curiosity and concern. What would Britney do now that she was finally free? One of her first major steps into her new life was marriage. Britney tied the knot with longtime partner Sam Asghari in 2022, a moment that symbolized hope, love, and a fresh start. The wedding was a private, intimate affair, but it represented something much larger: her ability to make decisions about her personal life without court approval. For fans, it was proof that Britney was reclaiming the milestones that had once been stripped from her. Yet even with joy came shadows. Questions lingered about whether she truly had the supportive circle she needed, or if she was still surrounded by people with their own agendas. Social media became both her outlet and her battlefield. Britney took to Instagram frequently, posting dance videos, cryptic captions, and emotionally charged reflections. To some, these posts were liberating, a woman finally able to express herself without restriction. To others, they raised red flags, sparking concern and endless speculation. Was Britney okay? Was she crying out for help, or was this simply her unfiltered self after years of being silenced? The fascination with her posts became a modern extension of the same voyeurism that had once fueled tabloids, a reminder that her freedom did not come with privacy. Her family, meanwhile, remained fractured. Britney openly spoke about the betrayal she felt from her parents and her sister, Jamie Lynn, who she accused of profiting from or enabling her conservatorship. The feud played out in public, with Britney's words often delivered through long Instagram posts or audio recordings, each one dripping with years of pent-up anger and pain. Reconciliation seemed unlikely, and the once tight-knit Louisiana family now stood divided, with the world watching their wounds spill out online. Even as she tried to embrace her independence, allegations of isolation emerged. Some reports suggested she remained guarded, wary of who to trust, and struggled with the adjustment to a life where decisions were entirely her own. Freedom, it seemed, brought both relief and disorientation. After all, how do you suddenly take control of your life when it had been taken from you for so long? Rumors of a return to music continued to swirl, with fans desperate to see her on stage again. But Britney seemed hesitant, even resistant, to step back into the industry that had brought her both unimaginable success and profound trauma. While collaborations and whispers of new projects surfaced, her reluctance suggested that music might no longer be the escape it once was. Life after freedom for Britney Spears has been complicated, messy, and deeply human. She is no longer the glossy pop princess the world tried to mold her into, but a woman scarred by her past, still trying to carve out a life that feels authentically hers. For the first time in decades, Britney is in charge of her own story, even if that story remains unfinished. Britney Spears' story is more than just a tale of fame, it is a defining chapter in the history of pop culture. From her first hit with "Baby One More Time" to her Las Vegas residencies, her music shaped an entire generation, influencing countless artists and leaving an indelible mark on the industry. Her songs became anthems of youth, freedom, and energy, while her image as the pop princess made her a household name worldwide. Yet beneath the glittering facade of success lies a far more complex legacy, one that extends beyond records and performances. Her life has become a cautionary tale of the costs of fame, the exploitation inherent in the entertainment industry, and the devastating effects of losing personal autonomy. Britney's story illustrates how the machinery of pop culture can elevate someone to unimaginable heights while simultaneously stripping away their humanity. Fans and critics alike have witnessed the destructive power of fame played out in real time, making her story both mesmerizing and heartbreaking. But it is also a story of resilience. Britney's survival in the face of systemic abuse, invasive media scrutiny, and legal control has transformed her into a symbol of endurance. She has become a beacon for those who have faced oppression or exploitation, a reminder that it is possible to reclaim one's life even after profound loss. Her journey resonates with fans not simply because of her music, but because of her courage, her vulnerability, and her determination to fight back against forces far larger than herself. Moreover, Britney's experience has sparked a broader conversation about mental health, the treatment of women in the music industry, and the importance of personal autonomy. Her testimony, her struggles, and her eventual freedom have forced the public and industry insiders alike to rethink the narratives around celebrity, control, and agency. She has challenged the long-held notion that public figures exist only for consumption, and in doing so, has changed the cultural understanding of vulnerability and accountability in fame. Ultimately, Britney Spears stands as both a pop legend and a survivor. Her music will endure for decades, but her story, the highs, the lows, and the triumph of reclaiming her life, cements her legacy in a different, perhaps even more powerful way. She is not only remembered for the songs that defined an era, but also for the courage she displayed in the face of unimaginable challenges. Britney Spears changed the way the world sees celebrity, vulnerability, and resilience, leaving behind a legacy that transcends music and speaks to the heart of human endurance.